Hi everyone, welcome back to Storytime Recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the film from 2010, Frozen. Without any further, let's get started. The film opens at a New England ski resort atop Mount Holliston. Three friends, Joe Lynch, Dan Walker, and Dan's girlfriend, Parker O'Neill, have come to the mountains to go skiing. Childhood closest buddies Dan and Joe have a yearly habit of going skiing together. Joe typically flirts with a female ski lift operator in order to obtain cheaper tickets. However, this time, a man takes her place. In order to obtain cheap tickets, the boys force Parker to flirt with the operator.
My girlfriend? That is so lame.
While she is at it, Joe gripes about Dan taking his girlfriend to a boys-only trip. He clearly doesn't like Parker because she doesn't even know how to ski, so Joe believes it wouldn't be as much fun. Dan says he's sorry, but he felt it would be fine to bring her along since they would be able to bond. When the time comes, they board the ski lift and head toward the top of the hill.
You know, I hooked up with a girl last semester.
While they are traveling, Joe criticizes Parker for smoking excessively, and Parker responds with an insult. Dan is in the middle between the two, attempting to manage the issue.
Worth of chapters to read.
Oh, come on.
When it suddenly stops operating, people using the lift complain in exasperation. Dan tries to comfort Parker, who is afraid of heights but presents a calm front. Joe teases her about it. Eventually, the lift keeps running and they arrive at the top. While skiing, Dan and Joe are unable to enjoy themselves due of Parker's slowness. Every few minutes, she trips and falls, which irritates Joe even more. At night, they have returned from the mountain and are lodging at a resort. The guys discuss the failed trip over pizza. Joe advises that the two of them take the last lift to the mountaintop and ski like they used to, and Parker overhears their conversation and apologizes for ruining their trip.
Okay.
Dan feels awful for her and invites her to join them again. Parker wants to stay in their hotel, claiming she doesn't like skiing anyhow, but Dan is adamant, so the three of them repack their equipment and head to the lift. When they arrive, the lift operator turns the lift off. The same man Parker had flirted with to obtain the tickets. When they beg him to let them leave one last time, the man chuckles at the group, claiming that they didn't even pay the entire sum the previous time. Additionally, they are unable to turn the lift back on because it is closing due to a storm, but he is adamant about not letting them go. When they offer him an additional $100, the operator accepts. As the group departs on the lift, they eagerly observe the skiers below. In the meantime, a colleague goes up to the lift operator and informs him of the schedule for the following week. The operator reacts by stating that he would be off work next week due to his brother's wedding. He leaves the co-worker in the lift in order to speak with the manager. Before he leaves, he tells him to wait until they return because there are still 3 people on the left. After the operator departs, the man notices 3 people descending from the mountain. After assuming that the individuals are the ones the operator was referring to, he stops the lift. Not knowing that Parker, Joe, and Dan are still on it. When the elevator stops, the group initially considers it to be a small inconvenience. When Joe yells in despair, everyone at the lift station has already departed. Also, as the temperature drops by the second, even though everyone is wearing warm clothing, the group is shivering in the cold. They discuss other terrible ways they could pass away to keep them amused and unaware to what is about to happen to them. They remain there for a short while before starting to panic when the lights go off. They now understand that someone purposefully stopped the lift, even if it wasn't a malfunction. They begin to shout in the hopes that someone would hear them. Parker panics, claiming that nobody is aware of their presence. But Dan thinks they will be rescued shortly because the lift stopped due to a power outage. In a panic, the couple starts fighting, and Parker remembers that it's Sunday, and the ski resort won't open until Friday of next week.
This shit happens.
If no one comes looking for them, they will therefore be stranded for nearly a week. Despite their promises that everything will be alright, the pals' expressions show signs of panic. Later, Joe needs to pee, and since he has nowhere else to go, he urinates off in the lift by raising the metal bar. As Parker groans in disdain, Dan remains silent, and then all of a sudden, it begins to snow. The group's problems got worse by the storm that the operator had warned them about. Later on, a snowplow approaches, causing the group to shout and wave in order to attract the driver's attention. At last, the driver pulls the vehicle to a stop directly beneath the group. They are happy to have been saved at last, but it turns out that the man stopped due to the weather and hasn't heard or seen them. After calling his superior and telling him to return immediately, the man turns his car around, as the group yells for him to halt. Sadly, he is unable to hear them. They hurl their ski equipment at him, but he ignores them and ultimately goes away. After Parker removes her gloves to smoke and they unintentionally fall off the lift, the group's sole escape route is for one of them to jump. Dan offers to do it and thinks he will be alright, since there is snow on the ground. Despite Joe's attempts to sway him by suggesting that they wait until morning, Dan is resolute. Despite Parker and Joe's constant urging that he quit, Dan tosses his snowboard on the ground and leaps off the lift. As soon as he hits the ground, both of his legs break. The other to ask him if he's okay, but all he hears for a brief moment is mumbling. Dan is appalled to discover bones sticking out of both of his knees. He will never be able to descend the mountain to seek assistance. Parker tosses her scarf at him in an attempt to halt the bleeding, but it lands on top of a tree. After that, Joe balls up his scarf and tosses it at his pal. It lands close by, but when Dan reaches for it, the bone sticks out even more. After tying it around his legs, Dan asks Joe to pull himself up on the suspension rope to reach the closest support tower. Joe may use the ladders in each tower to descend to the lower levels. Although Joe says he is barely able to do a pull-up, he still consents to do it for his best friend. At that moment, they hear snarling close by. A pack of wolves has detected Dan's blood and is approaching him. In a panic, Dan calls out for help, further enticing the wolves. After getting on top of it, Joe slips back into the lift because of the icicles. A wolf suddenly appears in front of Dan and snarls at him, but Dan remains motionless, afraid to move. Parker hurls her snowboard at the wolf, driving it away. However, he soon finds himself encircled by an entire pack of them. Realizing that he cannot survive any longer, Dan begs Joe to keep Parker from looking down as the animals encircle him. While holding Parker's face, Joe sobs as Dan is eaten by the wolf. After a while, there is no sound and everything becomes silent. Beyond the distant howling of wolves, Parker blames Joe of asking Dan to jump earlier, but Joe argues that he begged him not to. They argue and begin blaming each other for Dan's passing. In the end, they just hold each other and cry. In some way, the night goes by, and when the two of them wake up in the morning, Parker's hand is still wrapped around the metal bar she had grasped while she was asleep. When she tries to take it off, her hand is stuck to the bar. As she painfully releases her hold, the skin of her palm peels off. Due to their severe frostbite, the two are unable to endure another day on the lift. As Joe suggests, he tries to go to the support tower once more, but Parker advises them to wait a few hours to see if someone comes looking for them. After some time, Joe nods off and Parker sobs and urinates on herself in an uncomfortable way. When he wakes up, they discuss various topics in their lives. Joe tells her how he and Dan met in elementary school. He claims that since Dan died trying to save them, they shouldn't let his death go to waste.
Notice all these faces.
Then, Joe climbs back up on their seat in an attempt to reach a support tower. Since the icicles have melted this time, he may go more easily. However, as he steps on the seat, a bolt screw that secures the chair to the cable becomes dangerously loose, causing the chair to shake. He makes it to the other chair somehow, but the cable has left his palms bloody. As Joe, still firm, climbs to the port tower, a lone wolf is waiting for them on the ground. Parker throws her ski pole to the ground to aid him in battling the wolf. When Joe gets there, when he eventually descends, the animal attacks him, but he manages to grab hold of the pole and free himself. With haste, he puts on the snowboard and descends the mountain. Right behind, a pack of wolves follow him. Parker asks him to be careful as he disappears into the mountain. She is currently waiting for Joe to come back with assistance, alone in the cold. Even though hours have passed and he has not returned, Parker knows that the wolves must have reached Joe, but she still hopes that he will be safe. She remains until the next morning, but he doesn't come back. He must have abandoned her, ruining the boys' vacation. As Parker moves around the seat, the bolt then moves more forcefully. When the seat finally drops to the ground and lands directly on top of her, Her legs are broken. Parker gathers herself and crawls on the snow downhill. When she eventually sees the horrific sight of Joe's remains, before she can react, Parker sees a wolf in front of her, but it doesn't attack her since it is full from eating Joe. Parker manages to get to the side of the road and waits for assistance until someone ultimately picks her up in their car and leaves.
Right outside of Mount Hollis. Okay.
Thanks for watching, and remember to turn on your notifications to watch more movie recaps like this one.